Montana Territory, 1878. The wind carried the scent of snow from the distant mountains, promising a harsh winter to come. Samuel Thornton pulled his worn leather gloves tighter as he surveyed the rolling plains from atop his chestnut mare. At 25, he'd already seen enough bloodshed and betrayal to last several lifetimes. The Civil War had taken his father and brother, and the unforgiving frontier had claimed his mother to fever 2 winters past. Now all he had left was his small cattle operation and the belief that a man was better off alone in this wild country. "Come on, Maple," he whispered to his horse, turning her toward the distant smudge of Clearwater, the nearest semblance of civilization. His ranch hands could manage without him for a day while he picked up supplies. Besides, the walls of his cabin had begun closing in after too many nights alone with nothing but whiskey and memories. Samuel's lean face, bronzed from years under the Montana sun, remained impassive as he rode. His dark brown hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and though handsome with his square jaw and deep-set blue eyes, he rarely smiled these days. The frontier had taught him a harsh lesson: trust gets you killed out west. Better to keep to yourself, tend your herd, and avoid entanglements, especially those of the heart. Clearwater emerged from the golden prairie like an afterthought, a handful of wooden structures clinging to existence along a rutted main street. Samuel dismounted outside the general store, tethering Maple to the hitching post. His boots kicked up dust as he entered, nodding briefly to Mrs. Holloway behind the counter. The store smelled of coffee, leather, and tobacco, the comforting sense of civilization. "Your usual, Mr. Thornton, Mrs. Holloway asked, already reaching for his typical order. "Yes, ma'am, and some extra coffee if you have it." As she gathered his supplies, the bell above the door jingled. Samuel didn't turn, focused on counting out coins from his leather pouch, until a scent cut through the store's familiar smells, something delicate and floral. Lavender. He glanced up, and time seemed to slow. A young woman had entered, perhaps 20 years old, wearing a simple blue dress that somehow managed to look elegant despite the frontier setting. Her honey-blonde hair was partially pinned up, with loose tendrils framing a face that made Samuel forget his next breath. She wasn't just pretty, she was beautiful in a way that seemed entirely out of place in this rough territory. "Good morning, Miss Katherine," Mrs. Holloway called cheerfully. "Your order arrived yesterday." "Let me fetch it for you." The young woman smiled, and Samuel felt something stir in his chest, something he'd thought long dead. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. I appreciate you sending word." Her voice carried a slight Eastern accent, refined and educated. Samuel realized he was staring and quickly looked away, but not before she glanced in his direction. Their eyes met briefly, hers a startling shade of green, before he tipped his hat and turned back to his transaction. "That'll be all, Mrs. Holloway," he said, voice gruffer than intended. The older woman gave him a knowing smile as she handed over his parcels. "Miss Katherine Calloway just moved into the old Peterson place a few miles east of town," she offered without prompting. "Came all the way from Boston, if you can believe it, teaching at our new schoolhouse." Samuel merely nodded, unwilling to show interest. A Boston schoolteacher wouldn't last a winter in Montana Territory. Women like her, educated, refined, always returned east eventually, unable to endure the harshness of frontier life. He'd seen it happen before. As he turned to leave, he nearly collided with Miss Calloway, who had moved to examine a shelf of fabric. "Pardon me, ma'am," he said, stepping back. "No harm done," she replied, that faint smile returning. Up close he noticed a small scar near her right eyebrow, a tiny imperfection that somehow made her beauty more real, more human. He nodded again and made his escape, that scent of lavender following him outside. Loading his supplies onto Maple, Samuel tried to push the schoolteacher from his mind. Women meant complications, and complications got you killed out here. Besides, what would a Boston lady want with a rancher carrying nothing but scars and bad memories? He was halfway back to his ranch when the gunshot echoed across the prairie. Samuel reined in Maple, standing in his stirrups to scan the horizon. About a quarter-mile east, a small buggy had stopped on the road. Even from this distance, he recognized the blue dress. The schoolteacher stood beside her vehicle, while 2 men on horseback circled her like wolves. Damn it all, Samuel muttered. Every instinct told him to ride on, not his problem, not his fight. But something else, something he'd thought buried with his family, pushed him to turn Maple toward the scene. He approached at a canter, hand resting on the colt at his hip. As he drew nearer, he assessed the situation. Two rough-looking men, probably drifters, had stopped Miss Calloway's buggy. One held a rifle pointed lazily in her direction, while the other was dismounting, approaching her with clear intent. "That's far enough, gentlemen," Samuel called, stopping Maple about 20 yards away. All three turned to look at him. Miss Calloway's face showed fear, but also a surprising resolve. The men trailed trash by the look of them, sized up Samuel with narrowed eyes. "This ain't your concern, Cowboy," the one with the rifle said. "Just having a friendly chat with the lady." "Doesn't look friendly from where I'm standing," Samuel replied evenly. "Miss Calloway, are you all right?" She appeared startled that he knew her name but nodded slightly. "These men were just leaving," she said, her voice remarkably steady. The second man laughed. "We ain't decided that yet, have we, Earl?" Samuel's expression didn't change, but his body tensed ready. "I'm only saying this once. Get back on your horses and ride away, now." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Samuel knew he was outnumbered, but something told him these weren't killers, just opportunists who'd spotted a woman alone. Finally, Earl lowered his rifle slightly. "Ain't worth bullets," he muttered to his companion. "Come on, Jack." Jack spat on the ground near Miss Calloway's boots but retreated to his horse. "Plenty of other opportunities in this territory," he said with a final leer at the schoolteacher. Samuel remained motionless until the pair had ridden off, disappearing over a ridge to the north. Only then did he approach Miss Calloway, who had placed one hand against her buggy for support. "Are you hurt?" he asked, dismounting. "No," she took a deep breath, her composure remarkable. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton, Samuel Thornton. You knew my name earlier." Samuel gestured toward town. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned it." She nodded, then glanced at her buggy. "One of those men fired at my wheel when I wouldn't stop. I think it's damaged." Samuel examined the buggy and found the bullet had splintered part of the front wheel. "It'll hold to get you home, but you'll need it repaired properly soon." He looked up at her. "Peterson Place, right?" "Yes," she regarded him curiously. "You seem to know a lot about me, Mr. Thornton." "Small territory, Miss Calloway," he straightened. "I'll ride alongside you to make sure you get home safely." She hesitated, then nodded. "I would appreciate that." As they traveled the remaining few miles to her homestead, Samuel kept his attention on their surroundings, alert for any sign the drifters might return. Miss Calloway remained quiet beside him, though occasionally he felt her studying him with those remarkable green eyes. The Peterson place came into view, a modest cabin with a small barn, situated near a creek lined with cottonwoods. It looked better maintained than Samuel remembered from when old Peterson had lived there. "This is me," she said, pulling the buggy to a stop. "Thank you again for your assistance, Mr. Thornton." "Best get that wheel fixed before you travel again," he said, tipping his hat. "And perhaps consider carrying protection." "Protection?" "A firearm, Miss Calloway. Territory's still wild." She lifted her chin slightly. "I have a revolver, Mr. Thornton. I simply chose not to use it today." Samuel raised an eyebrow, reassessing the schoolteacher. "Then I suggest not hesitating next time. Men like that understand only one language out here." "I'm well aware of what men understand," she replied, her voice carrying a surprising edge. Then softer, "Would you care for some coffee before you continue your journey? It seems the least I can offer." Samuel knew he should decline. Getting involved with the schoolteacher, even for coffee, violated every rule he'd set for himself since his family's deaths. And yet something about Katherine Calloway intrigued him. Perhaps it was the contrast between her refined appearance and the steel he'd glimpsed beneath. "I should get back to my ranch," he said, even as Maple took a step toward the homestead of her own accord. Of course, was that disappointment in her voice. Another time, perhaps. As she climbed down from the buggy, that scent of lavender drifted toward him again. Samuel found himself saying, "One quick cup wouldn't hurt, I suppose." Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Wonderful, please, come inside while I stable the horse." "I'll handle the horse," he offered, dismounting. "You've had enough excitement for one day." Inside the cabin, Samuel was surprised by the transformation. What had been Peterson's Spartan bachelor quarters now contained simple but tasteful furnishings, a patterned rug, curtains at the windows, and bookshelves lined with volumes. A small bouquet of wildflowers sat in a jar on the table. Katherine moved confidently around the space, hanging her shawl and fetching coffee supplies. Samuel removed his hat, suddenly aware of the dust on his clothes and the length of time since his last proper bath. "How long have you been in Montana Territory?" he asked as she set water to boil. "3 months," she replied. "I arrived in early July." "And Boston before that?" She glanced at him. "Yes, though I grew up in Pennsylvania originally." "Long way from home." She turned to face him fully. "This is my home now, Mr. Thornton." Something in her tone made him study her more carefully. Most Easterners who came west spoke of it as an adventure, a temporary hardship before returning to civilization. Katherine Calloway spoke of Montana as if she had no intention of leaving. "What brought you all the way out here?" he asked. "Not many choose Montana willingly." A shadow crossed her face. "A teaching position, a new start." She busied herself with the coffee. "And you, are you native to the territory?" "No. Came from Missouri after the war. Started with nothing but a few cattle and built up from there." "Your ranch, is it large?" 500 acres, small herd, nothing fancy but it's mine." She placed a steaming cup before him. "That's no small accomplishment, Mr. Thornton." Their fingers brushed as he accepted the cup, and Samuel felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. He withdrew his hand quickly, focusing on the coffee. "School starts next week?" he asked. "Yes, 12 students enrolled so far, ages 6 to 15, her face brightened. "I've been preparing lessons for weeks." "Ambitious range," he commented. "One teacher for all grades." "I enjoy the challenge," she sipped her coffee. "And children are remarkably adaptable." They fell into surprisingly easy conversation. Katherine asked intelligent questions about ranching and the territory, while Samuel found himself genuinely interested in her teaching methods. An hour passed before he realized how long he'd stayed. "I should be going," he said, setting down his empty cup. "Thank you for the coffee, Miss Calloway." "Katherine, please," she said, walking him to the door. "And thank you again for your help today. I'm not sure what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Samuel nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. He'd done what any decent man would do. "About your buggy, I know the blacksmith in town. I'll tell him to expect you." "That's very kind." At the door he turned to face her. Standing this close, he could see flecks of gold in her green eyes, and that small scar seemed to draw his attention. "Miscall Katherine," he corrected himself. "This territory isn't Boston. People out here aren't always what they seem. Be careful who you trust." Her expression became unreadable. "I could say the same about Boston, Mr. Thornton. Appearances can be deceiving anywhere." Something in her words struck him as odd, but he merely nodded and placed his hat back on his head. "Good day, then." "Will I see you in town again?" she asked as he mounted Maple. Samuel hesitated. The smart answer was no. The schoolteacher represented exactly the kind of complication he'd sworn to avoid, and yet, perhaps, he said finally. "Good day, Katherine." As he rode away, the scent of lavender seemed to linger, even after the cabin had disappeared behind him. Samuel tried to focus on the tasks awaiting him at the ranch, but his mind kept returning to Katherine Calloway, to her surprising composure during danger, to the shadows that occasionally darkened her eyes, to the way she spoke of Montana as home. "Trust gets you killed out west." The mantra had served him well for years. So why suddenly did it ring hollow? The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity for Samuel. Fall roundup demanded his full attention as he and his ranch hands prepared the herd for winter. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and he had little time to think about the schoolteacher with the lavender scent. Little time, but not no time. In quiet moments, during meals or just before sleep claimed him, Katherine Calloway's face would appear in his thoughts. He told himself it was merely concern for a newcomer facing her first Montana winter, nothing more. Yet when his foreman mentioned needing supplies from town, Samuel volunteered to go himself. Clearwater looked different somehow as he rode in on a crisp October morning. The schoolhouse at the edge of town had fresh paint, and children's voices carried on the wind. Samuel found himself slowing Maple as he passed, glimpsing Katherine through the window. She stood at a blackboard, gesturing enthusiastically as her students watched. The sight brought an unbidden smile to his face. His errands took longer than expected, and as he loaded supplies onto Maple in the late afternoon, the school bell rang. Children spilled from the building, running toward homes or waiting parents. Katherine emerged last, locking the door behind her. She wore a rust-colored dress today, her hair pinned up neatly, though a few strands had escaped during the day. When she turned and saw him, her face brightened with recognition. "Mr. Thornton," she called, walking toward him. "What a pleasant surprise." "Miss Calloway," he touched the brim of his hat. "How goes the teaching?" "Wonderfully, the children are eager to learn." She glanced at his loaded horse. "Supply run?" "Yes, ma'am, winter preparations." "Will it be very harsh?" she asked, a flicker of concern crossing her features. "Can be. First one's always the hardest for newcomers." He hesitated, then added, "Do you have enough firewood laid in?" "Proper supplies?" "I believe so. Mr. Peterson left a good store of wood and I've been adding to it. The neighbors have been kind." Samuel nodded, relieved she wasn't completely unprepared. "Good, that's good." An awkward silence fell between them. Samuel knew he should mount up and leave, yet he found himself reluctant to end the encounter. "I was just heading to the cafe for some dinner," Katherine said suddenly. "Would you care to join me? As thanks for your help with those men." Every instinct warned against it. Dining publicly with the schoolteacher would set tongues wagging throughout the territory, and yet, "I'd be obliged," he heard himself say. Hanson's Cafe was the closest thing Clearwater had to a proper restaurant, a step above the saloon but still decidedly frontier in its offerings. As Samuel and Katherine entered together, he noticed several heads turn in their direction. Mrs. Hanson, a plump Norwegian woman with a perpetual smile, showed them to a table near the window. "Special today is venison stew," she informed them. "Fresh baked bread, too." "That sounds perfect," Katherine replied. "Thank you." When Mrs. Hanson departed, Samuel found himself unexpectedly nervous. It had been years since he'd dined with a woman who wasn't serving him food. "How is your buggy wheel?" he asked, grasping for a safe topic. "Fixed perfectly, thank you." "Mr. Jensen did excellent work," she smoothed her napkin. "And your ranch, is it far from town?" "About 10 miles northwest. Not the biggest spread, but the water's good." "Do you have family helping you run it?" Samuel's expression tightened. "No, just hired hands." Katherine seemed to sense the shift in his mood. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "It's fine," he took a sip of water. "Lost my family, father and brother in the war. Mother to fever 2 years back." "I'm very sorry," she said softly. "I lost my parents as well, though some years ago now." Their eyes met across the table, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. Before Samuel could respond, Mrs. Hanson arrived with their stew and bread, breaking the moment. As they ate, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Katherine spoke of her students, the troublemakers and the bright ones, the shy child she was slowly coaxing out of his shell. Samuel found himself genuinely interested, asking questions and even sharing a few stories from his own school days. "You should come visit the class sometime," she suggested. "The children would love to hear about ranching firsthand." Samuel nearly choked on his stew. "I'm not much for public speaking, Miss Calloway." "Katherine," she reminded him. "And you needn't give a formal lecture. Just answer questions about cattle and horses. The boys especially would be thrilled. He considered it, surprised to find the idea not entirely unpleasant. Perhaps. When roundup is finished. Her smile was worth the momentary discomfort. As they finished their meal, Samuel realized he'd enjoyed himself more than he had in years. Katherine Calloway was intelligent, witty, and surprisingly knowledgeable about subjects beyond teaching. She asked thoughtful questions about ranching and listened attentively to his answers. Outside the cafe, the autumn evening had turned cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "May I walk you home?" Samuel asked, then quickly added, "or to wherever you're staying in town." "That's very kind, but I'm boarding with Reverend and Mrs. Parker while the school is in session," she explained. "It's just there," she pointed to the white clapboard house beside the church. "I return to my cabin on weekends." "Ah, sensible arrangement." "Yes, though I miss my own space during the week." She glanced toward the Parker's house, then back to Samuel. "Thank you for dinner company. It was nice not to dine alone." "The pleasure was mine," he said, meaning it. Katherine held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then looked down. "Good night, Samuel." It was the first time she'd used his given name. The sound of it in her voice stirred something in his chest. "Good night, Katherine." As she walked toward the Parker's house, that now familiar scent of lavender trailed behind her. Samuel stood watching until she reached the door safely, then turned toward where Maple waited patiently. "You're treading dangerous ground, Thornton," he muttered to himself as he mounted up. Yet as he rode into the gathering darkness toward his ranch, Samuel couldn't bring himself to regret the evening. For the first time in years, he'd felt something other than grief, wariness, or grim determination. He'd felt alive. The sensation was as frightening as it was welcome. 2 weeks later, Samuel found himself standing before 20 expectant faces in Katherine's schoolhouse. Despite his initial reluctance, he'd agreed to speak to her class about ranching in Montana Territory. Now, hat in hand, he felt more nervous than he had facing down those drifters. "Mr. Thornton has kindly agreed to tell us about cattle ranching," Katherine was saying to her students. She wore a green dress today that brought out the color of her eyes. "Please show him the same respect you show me." A chorus of "Yes, Miss Calloway" filled the room. Samuel cleared his throat. "Well, I'm not much for speeches. Thought maybe you might have questions and I'd try to answer them." A forest of small hands shot into the air. Katherine smiled encouragingly, and Samuel pointed to a freckled boy of about 10. "Is it true you can shoot a wolf from 100 yards, Mr. Thornton?" the boy asked eagerly. Samuel suppressed a smile. "Wolves generally don't let you get that close for a clean shot. But yes, a good marksman with a proper rifle can hit targets at that distance." The questions continued, about cattle, horses, winter survival, and Indian encounters. Samuel found himself relaxing as he answered, the children's enthusiasm infectious. When he described how cowboys tracked lost cattle across the prairie, the students hung on his every word. "Can ladies be ranchers too?" asked a serious-faced girl of about 12. Samuel glanced at Katherine before answering. "Running a ranch is hard work, no matter who you are. But yes, there are women who run successful ranches in the territory. Usually widows who took over from their husbands, but they do the job as well as any man." The girl nodded, satisfied with his answer. The questions continued until Katherine finally called a halt. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," she said. "Children, please take out your arithmetic books now." As the students rustled through their desks, Katherine walked Samuel to the door. "You were wonderful," she said quietly. "They were absolutely captivated." "They're good kids," he replied. "You're doing fine work here." "Thank you," she hesitated, then added, "I'm returning to my cabin this afternoon for the weekend. Perhaps you might stop by tomorrow. I baked bread yesterday." Samuel knew he should refuse. In the weeks since their dinner, he'd thought of Katherine far too often. The smart thing would be to create distance, not cultivate closeness. And yet, "I could check your wood supply," he heard himself say. "Make sure you're set for when the snow comes." Her smile was radiant. "That would be most appreciated." "Mid-morning, then." I'll have coffee waiting. As Samuel rode away from the schoolhouse, he tried to convince himself his acceptance was merely neighborly concern. Katherine was new to the territory, facing her first winter alone. Checking her preparations was a kindness any decent man would offer, but the warmth that spread through him at the thought of seeing her again could not be explained away so easily. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Samuel completed his chores early, then saddled Maple for the ride to Katherine's homestead. He'd loaded his saddlebags with a small sack of coffee beans and a jar of honey from his own hives, practical gifts that wouldn't raise eyebrows. The Peterson place, Katherine's place now, looked different in the autumn light. She'd planted flower boxes beneath the windows, though the blooms were fading with the season. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, and the small barn and outbuildings showed signs of recent repairs. Katherine must have heard Maple's approach, for she appeared at the door before Samuel could dismount. She wore a simple blue dress with a white apron, her hair loosely braided over one shoulder. The smile that lit her face at the sight of him sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. "Right on time," she called. "The coffee's just ready." Samuel dismounted, retrieving his gifts from the saddlebag. "Brought a few things," he said, suddenly feeling awkward. "Coffee beans and honey for winter." How thoughtful, she accepted them with genuine pleasure. "Please come in while I stable your horse." "I'll see to Maple," he insisted. "You head inside." When he entered the cabin a few minutes later, the scent of fresh bread and lavender greeted him. Katherine had set 2 cups on the table, along with a loaf of bread and a crock of butter. "Your timing is perfect," she said, pouring the coffee. "The bread is still warm." They settled at the table, and Samuel found himself relaxing in her presence. The bread was delicious, better than anything he'd tasted in years, and the coffee strong and hot. "You've been making improvements," he commented. "The place looks good." "Thank you. The neighbors have been kind, helping with repairs, showing me how to prepare for winter." She buttered another slice of bread. "I've been learning to preserve food too. Mrs. Parker has been teaching me." "Smart. First winter's always the hardest." Katherine looked at him over her coffee cup. "You say that as if you're expecting me to leave after the first snowfall." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "Most Easterners do, no shame in it. Territory's not for everyone." "I'm not most Easterners," she said simply. "This is my home now." There it was again, that certainty when she spoke of staying. Most newcomers, especially women alone, spoke of Montana as a temporary challenge. Katherine spoke of it as a permanent choice. "What about family back east?" he asked. "Don't they worry about you out here alone?" A shadow crossed her face. "I have no close family remaining, an aunt in Philadelphia, but we're not close." Samuel recognized the evasion. He'd used similar phrases when avoiding topics from his past. Something told him there was more to Katherine Calloway's story than a simple desire to teach in the West. "After we finish," he said, changing the subject, "I'll check your wood supply, maybe split some more if needed. Winter can hit sudden out here." "I would appreciate that." Her expression softened. "You're very kind, Samuel." "Just being neighborly," he replied, though they both knew his 10-mile ride hardly qualified as a neighbor's visit. Outside, Samuel inspected her woodpile with a critical eye. "Not bad, but you'll need more," he decided. "Winter nights get bitter and spring comes late." He spent the next 2 hours splitting logs, aware of Katherine watching from the porch as she mended clothing. The physical labor felt good, and knowing he was helping her prepare for winter gave him satisfaction he hadn't anticipated. When he finally set the axe down, Katherine approached with a dipper of water. "You must be thirsty." He drank gratefully, suddenly aware of how domestic the scene must appear, him working in her yard, her bringing him water. Like a husband and wife on their homestead. The thought both unsettled and intrigued him. "That should get you through the first half of winter," he said, gesturing to the expanded woodpile. "I can come back before the heavy snow to add more. I don't want to impose on your time." "It's no imposition." He wiped his brow with his sleeve. "Could bring my wagon next time, haul more than Maple can carry. Katherine studied him, head tilted slightly. Why are you helping me, Samuel? The directness of her question caught him off guard. Told you, being neighborly. Is that all? Samuel looked away, unable to meet those searching green eyes. Territory's hard enough without people looking out for each other, he said finally. Especially for those new to it. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell lavender again. I think there's more to it than that, she said softly, for both of us. The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. Samuel knew he stood at a crossroads. The path he'd followed for years, isolation, self-reliance, emotional distance, stretched in one direction. In the other lay something unknown, something both frightening and compelling. Before he could respond, the sound of an approaching rider broke the tension. They both turned to see a man on horseback coming up the road, Thomas Jensen, the blacksmith who had repaired Katherine's buggy. Miss Calloway, Jensen called as he approached, got that part for your stove you ordered. Thank you, Mr. Jensen, Katherine replied, stepping back from Samuel. You're most prompt. Jensen dismounted, a package in hand. He nodded to Samuel. Thornton, didn't expect to see you out this way. Helping Miss Calloway prepare for winter, Samuel replied, his tone neutral despite the irrational annoyance he felt at the interruption. Mighty neighborly of you, Jensen remarked, his expression knowing, especially given the distance from your spread. Katherine accepted the package from Jensen. Mr. Thornton has been kind enough to ensure I have adequate firewood. The last thing Clearwater needs is its schoolteacher freezing to death before Christmas. Her light tone eased the moment and Jensen chuckled. True enough, well, I won't keep you. Just passing by on my way back from the Henson's place. After Jensen departed, an awkward silence fell between Samuel and Katherine. The interrupted moment seemed impossible to recapture. I should be heading back, Samuel said finally. Still have chores waiting. Of course, was that disappointment in her voice. Thank you for the wood and the company. As he prepared to mount Maple, Katherine placed a hand on his arm. The harvest social is next Saturday at the church, she said. Will you attend? Samuel hadn't planned to. Large gatherings had never been to his taste, and he'd avoided most community events since settling in the territory. Hadn't thought about it, he admitted. I would very much like to see you there, she said, her directness both surprising and appealing. Samuel hesitated, then nodded. Then I'll be there. Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Wonderful, I look forward to it. As he rode away, Samuel knew he was treading dangerous ground. Katherine Calloway was becoming important to him in ways he hadn't allowed anyone to be since his family's deaths. The prospect terrified him, and yet he found himself counting the days until the harvest social. The harvest social transformed Clearwater's small church into a warm haven against the autumn chill. Lanterns glowed, tables groaned under the weight of food, and a trio of musicians played lively tunes in the corner. Samuel stood awkwardly near the entrance, hat in hand, scanning the crowd for Katherine. He'd bathed carefully, shaved, and worn his one good shirt beneath his cleanest jacket. Despite his usual aversion to such gatherings, he found himself eager to see her. Thornton, didn't expect to see you here. Frank Wilkins, one of the local ranchers, clapped him on the shoulder. Finally decided to rejoin civilization, eh? Something like that, Samuel replied, still searching the room. Wilkins followed his gaze, then grinned knowingly. Ah, looking for our new schoolteacher, are you? She's over by the punch bowl, talking to Reverend Parker's wife. Samuel nodded his thanks and made his way through the crowd. When he finally spotted Katherine, he paused, momentarily stunned. She wore a dress of deep burgundy that complemented her fair skin and honey-blonde hair, which was arranged more elaborately than he'd seen before. She looked beautiful and utterly at home among the townspeople, laughing at something Mrs. Parker had said. As if sensing his presence, Katherine looked up. Their eyes met across the room and her smile broadened. She excused herself from Mrs. Parker and moved toward him. You came, she said, genuine pleasure in her voice. Said I would. He shifted awkwardly, suddenly aware of how out of place he felt. nice gathering. It is, isn't it? The community has been so welcoming. She glanced toward the dance floor where several couples were circling to a lively tune. Do you dance, Samuel? He cleared his throat. Been some years. Probably forgotten how. I doubt that, she replied, her eyes twinkling. Like riding a horse, the body remembers. Before he could protest further, she had taken his hand and was leading him toward the dancing area. Samuel had a brief moment of panic. What would people think? But as Katherine turned to face him, all concerns about gossip faded. He placed one hand at her waist, took her other hand in his, and they joined the dance. To his surprise, Katherine was right. His body did remember. They moved together smoothly, and Samuel found himself enjoying the simple pleasure of holding her, of moving in time to music. Katherine's face was flushed with happiness, her eyes bright in the lantern light. See, she said as they turned, you dance beautifully. Got a good partner, he replied, surprising himself with the easy compliment. They danced 3 songs before taking a break for punch and food. As they stood near the refreshment table, Samuel noticed several glances in their direction, some approving, others curious. Word of his interest in the schoolteacher would be all over the territory by morning. Strangely, he found he didn't mind. You've caused quite a stir in Clearwater, he commented as they found seats on a bench near the wall. Have I? She looked genuinely surprised. Young, educated Eastern woman comes to teach in a frontier town. Of course you have. Half the unmarried men in 3 counties have probably thought about calling on you. Katherine laughed softly. If so, they've kept their thoughts to themselves. You're the only one who's shown any particular interest in my well-being. The simple statement hung between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge its implications. How are your students progressing? Samuel asked, changing the subject. Katherine's face lit up as she described her pupils' accomplishments and challenges. Samuel found himself drawn into her enthusiasm, asking questions and offering suggestions about the more difficult boys. You understand children better than you let on, she observed after he suggested a practical approach to engaging a reluctant student. Samuel shrugged, had a younger brother. Wasn't so different from some of your troublemakers. You've never spoken much of your family, she said gently. Not much to say, they're gone. He looked down at his punch cup. War took my father and brother. Mother never really recovered, then pneumonia took her 2 winters back. I'm sorry, Samuel. Katherine placed her hand over his. Loss leaves holes that never quite fill, doesn't it? The understanding in her voice made him look up. Sounds like you know something about that. Yes, her eyes held shadows. My parents died in a fire when I was 16. I lived with my aunt afterward, but it was never home again. Samuel turned his hand to clasp hers. Is that why you came west? For a fresh start. Something flickered across her face, hesitation, perhaps even fear. Partially, she said carefully. Teaching positions are more available out here and I wanted independence. Before he could probe further, Reverend Parker approached. Miss Calloway, Mrs. Hanson was hoping you might lead the children's song we practiced. Katherine nodded, squeezing Samuel's hand before releasing it. Of course, Reverend. I'll be right there. As she walked away, Samuel found himself studying her with new eyes. Katherine's story made sense on the surface. Many women did come west seeking independence or teaching positions. Yet something in her manner when speaking of her past suggested complications she wasn't sharing. The evening continued pleasantly. Samuel danced with Katherine twice more, conversed with neighbors he'd barely spoken to in years, and even found himself enjoying the community atmosphere he'd avoided for so long. When the social finally ended, he offered to walk Katherine back to the Parkers' home. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered like diamonds across the black sky. Their breath fogged in the autumn air as they walked, Katherine's hand tucked in the crook of Samuel's arm. Thank you for coming tonight, she said. I know social gatherings aren't your preference. Enjoyed it more than I expected, he admitted. Good food, good music. Good company, she suggested, a smile in her voice. The best, he replied honestly. They reached the Parkers' porch too quickly. Samuel found himself reluctant to end the evening to relinquish her company. "When do you return to your cabin?" he asked. "Tomorrow afternoon. The Parkers are driving me back after services." Samuel nodded. "Winter's coming soon. Would be good to check your final preparations before the snow." Catherine's eyes sparkled in the moonlight. "Are you offering to call on me again, Samuel Thornton?" "If you've no objection," he replied, suddenly uncertain. "I have no objection whatsoever." She stepped closer. "In fact, I'd be disappointed if you didn't." Samuel felt drawn toward her, the distance between them shrinking. Katherine tilted her face up, her expression open and expectant. Before he could think better of it, Samuel leaned down and pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was brief, chaste, yet it sent warmth coursing through him that had nothing to do with the autumn night. When he pulled back, Catherine's eyes remained closed for a moment, her lips slightly parted. "Good night, Katherine," he said softly. She opened her eyes, a smile spreading slowly across her face. "Good night, Samuel. I'll expect you Tuesday." "Tuesday," he agreed. As he walked back toward where his horse waited, Samuel felt lighter than he had in years. The walls he'd built around himself since the war seemed to be crumbling, and for once he didn't try to reinforce them. Tuesday's visit turned into regular calls at Catherine's cabin. Samuel found reasons to ride out, delivering firewood, checking her roof before winter, bringing supplies from town. Each visit lasted longer than the last as they shared meals, conversation, and gradually more of themselves. Katherine proved surprisingly capable for an Eastern woman. She could bake bread that put his own hardtack to shame, mend clothing with neat stitches, and had even learned to shoot reasonably well, though her aim still needed work. As November deepened toward December, Samuel found himself thinking of Katherine constantly. Her smile, her voice, the scent of lavender that seemed to follow her, all had become precious to him. He'd begun to imagine a future that included her, a thought that both exhilarated and terrified him. On a crisp December afternoon, Samuel arrived at Catherine's cabin with his wagon loaded with firewood and winter provisions. The first heavy snow was predicted within days, and he wanted to ensure she was prepared. Katherine met him outside, wrapped in a heavy shawl against the cold. "You didn't have to bring so much," she said, though her smile belied any real objection. "Winter's no joke out here," he replied, jumping down from the wagon. "Better to have too much than too little." They worked together to unload the supplies, their breath clouding in the cold air. Katherine had become more comfortable with such tasks, no longer the city woman who had arrived in summer. Inside, she prepared coffee while Samuel built up the fire. The cabin felt like a haven against the gathering cold, warm, inviting, scented with lavender and the soup simmering on the stove. "Schools closed until after New Year's?" Samuel asked as they settled at the table. "Yes, the children need to help their families prepare for winter and travel becomes too difficult." She poured the coffee. "I'll miss them, though." "You're good with them," he observed. "They respect you." Children know when adults genuinely care about them. She smiled over her cup. Even the troublemakers respond eventually. Samuel watched her, struck again by how natural she seemed here, despite her Eastern background. "You've adapted well to life out here." "Is that surprise I hear?" she teased. "Honest admiration," he corrected. "Many from back east can't or won't adjust to frontier life." Catherine's expression grew thoughtful. "Perhaps I was ready for change. Boston had complications." There it was again, that hint of something left unsaid. Samuel had noticed it several times when Katherine spoke of her past. Usually he let it pass, respecting her privacy as she respected his. Today something prompted him to probe further. "What kind of complications?" he asked quietly. Katherine set down her cup, her gaze shifting to the window where the first flakes of snow had begun to fall. "The usual sort," she said finally. "Expectations, constraints. The weight of other people's opinions." "Seems like there might be more to it than that," Samuel ventured. She looked at him then, her green eyes searching his face. "There is," she admitted. "But it's not a pleasant story, Samuel. Most true stories aren't." Katherine was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. I was engaged in Boston, to a man named William Harper. He was from a good family, respected, charming. Her fingers tightened around her cup. At least that's what everyone saw. Something cold settled in Samuel's stomach, and what didn't they see? His temper. His need for control. She drew a deep breath. It started small, criticisms, complaints when I spoke to other men. Then came the first time he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. Anger flared in Samuel's chest. He hurt you. Yes, always where it wouldn't show in public, always with apologies afterward. Her voice remained steady, though pain shadowed her eyes. I tried to end the engagement. He threatened to ruin my reputation, to tell everyone I had been improper with him. So you ran, Samuel said, understanding dawning. Katherine nodded. I had an offer to teach in Montana Territory. It seemed far enough that he couldn't follow easily. I left in the night, told no one where I was going except my aunt, who helped me escape. The pieces fell into place. Her insistence that Montana was now her home, her reluctance to discuss Boston, her surprising determination to face frontier hardships. Does he know where you are? Samuel asked, suddenly concerned. I don't think so. I wrote to my aunt using only the territory name, not the town. She promised not to tell him, even if he came asking. Katherine met his gaze directly. Now you understand why I can't go back east, Samuel. Why this must be my home now. Samuel reached across the table and took her hand. Thank you for trusting me with the truth. I've wanted to tell you for some time, she admitted. But I feared you might think less of me, or worse, that you might not believe me. I believe you, he said firmly, and I could never think less of you for escaping a man like that. Relief softened her features. You're the first person here who knows. I've been so careful not to let anything slip, to be the perfect schoolteacher everyone expects. Is that why you always smell of lavender? Samuel asked, the question arising suddenly. To be what they expect. A faint smile touched her lips, partially. It's also a reminder my mother always wore lavender water. It helps me feel connected to her even now. Samuel nodded, understanding the need to maintain connections to those lost. He still kept his father's pocket watch, though it had long since stopped working. The snow was falling more heavily now, white flakes swirling beyond the window. Samuel knew he should leave soon if he wanted to reach his ranch before dark, yet he was reluctant to go. I should start back, he said finally, though he made no move to rise. The storm's coming faster than expected, Katherine observed, looking out at the thickening snow. Perhaps you should stay until it passes. The suggestion hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to voice. Wouldn't be proper, Samuel said, though his heart raced at the thought of remaining. People talk. People already talk, she replied softly. They've been talking since you first rode alongside my buggy, and truthfully, Samuel, I find I care less and less what they say. She stood and moved around the table to stand before him. Samuel rose to meet her, their bodies close in the warmth of the cabin. Katherine, he began, uncertain what he meant to say. She placed a finger against his lips. I know what I'm asking, Samuel. I've never been more certain of anything. He searched her face, finding only honesty and the same longing he felt. Slowly, deliberately, he bent to kiss her. Not the chaste goodnight kiss they'd shared before, but something deeper, an acknowledgement of what had been growing between them for months. Katherine responded with a passion that surprised and delighted him, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed closer. Samuel felt the last of his reservations melting away like snow in spring sunshine. When they finally parted, both breathless, Samuel pressed his forehead to hers. I care for you, Katherine, more than I thought possible. And I for you, she whispered. Stay with me, Samuel, not just tonight. Stay with me always. The words were an offering and a question. Samuel knew his answer would change everything for both of them. Always, he promised, and kissed her again as the snow fell thicker outside, blanketing the world in white. Morning found them tangled together beneath quilts and blankets, the cabin cold beyond their warm cocoon. Samuel woke first, momentarily disoriented until he felt Catherine's warm body curled against his. The events of the previous night flooded back, their confessions, their lovemaking, their promises. He watched her sleeping face, memorizing the sweep of her lashes against her cheeks, the slight part of her lips, the way her honey-blonde hair spilled across the pillow. Something fierce and protective swelled in his chest. She had trusted him with her truth, with her body, with her heart. He would sooner cut off his right arm than betray that trust. Katherine stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment she seemed confused, then she smiled, a slow, radiant smile that warmed Samuel to his core. "Good morning," she murmured, stretching slightly beneath the covers. "Morning." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in months." She propped herself on one elbow, looking toward the window. "My goodness, the snow." Samuel followed her gaze. Beyond the frosted glass, the world had transformed overnight. Snow blanketed everything, drifts piling against the cabin walls, white as far as the eye could see. "First big storm," he commented. "Won't be the last." Katherine looked back at him, suddenly uncertain. "Will you be able to get home?" Eventually, he traced a finger along her bare shoulder. "Not today, though." "Maybe not tomorrow either," looking at those drifts. Oh, a smile tugged at her lips. How unfortunate. Samuel chuckled, pulling her closer. "Terrible situation. Might have to stay right here with you for days." "However will we pass the time?" she asked innocently, though her eyes danced with mischief. Their laughter faded into kisses, and it was some time before they finally rose to face the day. The storm lasted 3 days, during which Samuel and Katherine remained snowbound in her cabin. They kept the fire burning, prepared meals from her stores, and talked for hours, sharing stories of their pasts, dreams for their futures, and deepening the connection that had been building since summer. On the 3rd night, as they lay before the fire, Samuel spoke the words that had been forming in his heart. "Marry me, Katherine." She turned in his arms to face him, her expression serious in the firelight. "Are you certain?" "My past has nothing to do with our future," he interrupted gently. "I love you, I want to build a life with you, everything else is just details." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "I love you too, Samuel." "Yes, I'll marry you." Their kiss sealed the promise, and Samuel felt the last pieces of his heart, the parts he'd thought permanently broken by war and loss, finally healing. When the storm finally passed and the roads became passable, Samuel reluctantly prepared to return to his ranch. There were animals to check on, hands to pay, responsibilities he couldn't ignore. "I'll speak to Reverend Parker about the wedding," he told Katherine as he saddled Maple. "If you're agreeable, perhaps after Christmas." "That seems perfect," she replied, helping him with the saddle. "Though I'll miss you terribly until then." "I'll ride in to see you as often as the weather permits," he promised. "And come spring, you'll move to the ranch as Mrs. Thornton." The name brought a flush to her cheeks. "I like the sound of that." They kissed goodbye, both knowing the separation would be temporary. Samuel rode away with a lighter heart than he'd had in years, the future suddenly bright with possibility. 2 weeks passed, with Samuel making the journey to town twice despite difficult conditions. Christmas approached, and with it, their wedding day. Samuel found himself smiling at odd moments, whistling as he worked, earning curious glances from his ranch hands. Then came the letter. Samuel was in Clearwater, finalizing wedding arrangements with Reverend Parker, when Mrs. Hanson approached him outside the general store. "Mr. Thornton," she called. "There was a letter for Miss Calloway at the post office. Since you're heading to the school, perhaps you could deliver it." Of course, Samuel agreed, accepting the envelope. As he tucked it into his pocket, he couldn't help noticing the Boston postmark and elegant handwriting. Probably from Katherine's aunt, he reasoned, with congratulations on their engagement. The schoolhouse was quiet when he arrived, the children having been dismissed for the holiday break. He found Katherine at her desk, grading papers, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Samuel, I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." He crossed the room to kiss her, then remembered the letter. "Special delivery," he said, handing her the envelope, "from Boston." Catherine's smile faltered as she took the letter. "Thank you." She turned it over in her hands, making no move to open it. "Expecting news from your aunt?" Samuel asked. Yes, probably." She set the letter aside. "I'll read it later. Tell me about your day instead." But something in her manner had changed, a tension that hadn't been there before. Throughout their conversation, her eyes kept returning to the unopened letter. Finally, Samuel said gently, "Katherine, if something's wrong, you can tell me." She met his gaze, then sighed. "I'm being silly, it's just. Letters from Boston make me nervous. Would you like me to leave while you read it?" Katherine considered, then shook her head. "No, I'd rather have you here if you don't mind." "I don't mind at all." She picked up the letter, breaking the seal with a small letter opener. As she unfolded the paper, Samuel saw her face pale. Her hands began to tremble slightly as she read. "Katherine," he prompted when she remained silent after finishing. She looked up, her eyes wide with something like fear. "It's from William." Cold dread settled in Samuel's stomach. "Your former fiancé." "Yes," she handed him the letter. "He knows I'm here. He's coming to bring me home." Samuel scanned the page quickly, anger building with each line. The letter was polite on the surface but threaded with menace, references to Catherine's confusion and temporary flight, assertions of his forgiveness and willingness to forget her indiscretion. It concluded with the information that he would arrive by Christmas to restore her to her rightful place. "How did he find you?" Samuel asked, struggling to keep his voice calm. "I don't know, perhaps my aunt." She shook her head. "No, she wouldn't betray me. He might have intercepted a letter or hired someone to track me." Samuel set the letter down carefully. "When exactly does he arrive?" 3 days from now, according to the date." Catherine's voice trembled slightly. "Samuel, I can't see him. I can't go back." "You won't," he said firmly. "You're going to be my wife, Katherine. No one is taking you anywhere you don't want to go. You don't understand. William is connected. His family has influence, money. He's used to getting what he wants." Fear clouded her eyes. "And he can be very charming when he chooses. He'll tell people I'm confused, ill, that he's come to help me." Samuel took her hands in his. "Katherine, look at me. Do you trust me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "With my life." "Then believe me when I say I won't let him take you. Not now, not ever." He squeezed her hands gently. "We'll face this together." Some of the tension eased from her shoulders. "What should we do?" Samuel considered. "First, we move up the wedding, tomorrow instead of after Christmas." "Tomorrow," her eyes widened. "Is that possible?" "Reverend Parker will understand once we explain." "Being my wife gives you additional protection under the law." He thought for a moment. "Then we return to the ranch. If Harper wants to find you, he'll have to come through me first." Katherine nodded slowly. "All right." "Tomorrow." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I love you, Katherine. Nothing and no one will change that." "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door." "It's our door now," he corrected gently, "and trouble's just part of life out west." They spoke with Reverend Parker that afternoon, explaining enough of the situation to secure his agreement for an immediate ceremony. The Reverend, seeing Catherine's distress, readily agreed to marry them the following morning. That night, as Samuel prepared to return to his ranch for the last time as a bachelor, Katherine pressed something into his hand, a small sachet of dried lavender. "For luck," she said with a tremulous smile. "I'll see you tomorrow." Samuel tucked it carefully into his pocket, the familiar scent reminding him of all they had shared since summer. "Nothing could keep me away," he promised. The wedding took place the next morning with little fanfare but much sincerity. Mrs. Parker and the Reverend's daughter served as witnesses, and though the ceremony was hastily arranged, Katherine had managed to wear a pretty blue dress with a small bouquet of dried flowers. As Samuel slipped a simple gold band onto Katherine's finger, his mother's ring, preserved for this moment he'd never expected to come, he felt a profound sense of rightness. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Parker declared. You may kiss your bride. Samuel kissed Katherine gently, mindful of their audience, though his heart raced with the knowledge that she was now his wife. They departed immediately for the ranch, traveling in Samuel's wagon with Katherine's most essential belongings. The rest would be collected later, after the situation with Harper was resolved. Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton, Samuel said as they approached the ranch house. The modest cabin had never looked more inviting, smoke curling from the chimney where his foreman had kept the fire burning in anticipation of their arrival. Katherine's smile was radiant. It's perfect. That evening, after sharing the news with his surprised but pleased ranch hands, Samuel and Katherine celebrated their marriage privately. Later, as she slept in his arms, Samuel found himself planning their defense should Harper actually appear. The man might have money and connections back east, but this was Montana territory. Different rules applied here. 2 days passed in newlywed bliss, the threat of Harper's arrival temporarily pushed aside. Samuel showed Katherine the ranch operations, introduced her properly to his hands, and helped her arrange their home to her liking. The cabin felt transformed with her presence, warmer, more welcoming, touched by her particular grace. On the morning of the third day, when Harper's letter had indicated he would arrive in Clearwater, Samuel was checking fences with 2 of his hands when his foreman, Jenkins, rode up at a gallop. "Rider coming," Jenkins reported. "City fellow by the looks of him, asked specific directions to find you." Samuel's jaw tightened. Did he give a name? "Harper said he's an old friend of your wife's from back east." Katherine had been right. Harper had tracked her down. Samuel glanced back toward the ranch house, where Katherine was preparing lunch, unaware of the approaching threat. "Jenkins, ride back and tell Mrs. Thornton to stay inside. Don't mention Harper, just say there's a visitor coming and I'll handle it." He checked his revolver, then swung onto Maple's back. "I'll meet our guest before he reaches the house." Jenkins nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. "You want backup, boss?" Samuel considered, then nodded. "Have Jim shadow me, but stay out of sight unless things go sideways." As Jenkins rode back to alert Katherine and position Jim, Samuel turned Maple toward the approaching rider. He would meet Harper well away from the house, away from Katherine. The man he intercepted about a half-mile from the ranch house matched Katherine's descriptions precisely. William Harper sat his rented horse with the awkward posture of a city man unused to riding. He was handsome in a polished way, well-dressed despite the journey, with carefully groomed dark hair and an expression of entitled confidence. Samuel stopped Maple directly in Harper's path, blocking the way forward. "Mr. Harper," he said without preamble, "I understand you're looking for me." Harper reined in his horse, surprise briefly crossing his features before his smooth mask returned. "Actually, I'm looking for Miss Katherine Calloway. I was told she could be found at this ranch." "You're half right," Samuel replied coldly. "My wife is indeed at the ranch, but there is no Miss Calloway here." Harper's expression hardened. "Wife, I think there must be some mistake. Katherine Calloway is engaged to me." "The mistake is yours," Samuel said evenly. "Katherine Thornton is my lawfully wedded wife as of 2 days ago. Whatever arrangement you believe existed before is null and void." Anger flashed in Harper's eyes. "This is absurd. Katherine has been confused, unwell. I've come to take her home where she belongs." "She is home," Samuel stated flatly, "and she's not going anywhere." Harper studied him with the calculating gaze of a man accustomed to manipulating others. "I don't know what lies she's told you, Mr. Thornton, but Katherine has been unstable since her parents' deaths. She fled Boston during a difficult period, breaking our engagement without explanation. Her doctors—" "Spare me the performance," Samuel interrupted. "I know exactly why she left Boston and why she fears you. The marks you left on her body may have faded, but the memory hasn't." Shock registered on Harper's face, quickly replaced by cold fury. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. My family has connections that reach even to this godforsaken territory. One telegram and your precious marriage could be invalidated." One word about Katherine's condition, and she could be removed from your custody for her own protection. Samuel's hand drifted closer to his revolver. Let me be very clear, Mr. Harper, this isn't Boston. Out here a man protects what's his. Katherine has chosen me, chosen this life. If you attempt to force her return, you'll regret it deeply. Is that a threat? Harper asked, his voice dangerously soft. It's a promise, Samuel replied. Now you have two choices. Ride back to town, take the next stage east, and forget Katherine exists. Or persist in this foolishness and face consequences you're not prepared for. For a moment it seemed Harper might challenge him. Then with a tight smile he inclined his head. I see. Well, perhaps I should speak with Katherine directly, let her make her own choice. That's not happening, Samuel said firmly. Are you afraid of what she might choose, Mr. Thornton? Harper's tone was mocking. Perhaps your rustic charms pale in comparison to what she left behind. Samuel remained impassive, though rage burned beneath his calm exterior. My wife has made her choice clear. She wants nothing to do with you or Boston. Your wife doesn't know her own mind, Harper snapped, his polished veneer cracking. She belongs with me with her own kind. Not in this wilderness with some uncultured rancher. I believe that's my decision to make, came Katherine's clear voice from behind Samuel. Both men turned. Katherine sat astride one of Samuel's gentler horses, her back straight, her expression composed despite the pallor of her face. She wore a simple riding skirt and jacket, her hair braided down her back, every inch the rancher's wife, yet carrying herself with the quiet dignity that had first drawn Samuel to her. Katherine, Harper said, his tone instantly softening. My dear, I've been so worried. Don't, she said sharply, don't pretend concern after what you did. Harper's expression hardened. I did nothing that wasn't necessary to correct your behavior. A woman needs guidance, structure. A woman needs respect, Katherine countered, something you never gave me. Samuel moved Maple closer to Katherine's horse, placing himself slightly between her and Harper. You've heard her, Harper. Leave now while you still can. Harper ignored him, focusing entirely on Katherine. You can't possibly intend to stay here in this primitive place. Think of what you're giving up, culture, society, comfort, for what? A life of hardship with a man who can never understand your background. I've given up nothing of value, Katherine replied steadily, and gained everything I truly need. Samuel understands me better in 6 months than you did in 2 years. Fury twisted Harper's features. You'll regret this, Katherine. When the novelty of playing frontier wife wears off, when you're tired of dirt and deprivation, you'll remember what you threw away. The only thing I regret, Katherine said clearly, is not leaving you sooner. Go back to Boston, William. There's nothing for you here. For a moment Harper seemed ready to explode with rage. Then, with visible effort, he regained his composure. This isn't over, he said softly. You've made a foolish choice and you'll live to regret it. Both of you. With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, his stiff posture betraying his anger. Samuel watched until Harper was well down the road before turning to Katherine. You were supposed to stay in the house, he said gently. I couldn't let you face him alone, she replied, her voice trembling slightly now that the confrontation was over. Not when it was my problem to solve. Samuel reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. It's our problem, Katherine. We face things together now. She squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Do you think he'll really leave? Maybe not immediately, Samuel admitted. Men like Harper don't give up easily when their pride is wounded, but he will eventually. He has no power here. Katherine nodded, though worry still lined her face. I'm sorry to bring this trouble to you, Samuel. Don't apologize for his actions, Samuel said firmly. Besides, you're worth any trouble, Mrs. Thornton. A small smile curved her lips at the name. I do like the sound of that. They rode back to the ranch together, alert but united. Samuel suspected they hadn't seen the last of William Harper, but for now, they had won this round. Katherine was safe, she was his wife, and he would move heaven and earth to keep her that way. Harper remained in Clearwater for 3 more days, making inquiries about Katherine and Samuel, attempting to sow doubts about her stability and the legitimacy of their hasty marriage. But the town had already accepted Katherine as one of their own, and Samuel's standing in the community, though quiet, was solid. Harper's insinuations fell on deaf ears. On the 4th day, he boarded the eastbound stage, his departure noted and reported to Samuel by Frank Wilkins, who had taken it upon himself to monitor the Easterner's movements. "Looks like he's given up," Wilkins reported, stopping by the ranch, though he didn't seem happy about it. "I don't expect he was," Samuel agreed, relief evident in his voice. "Thank you for keeping an eye on him, Frank." "Least I could do. Nobody likes a man who puts his hands on a woman." Wilkins shook his head in disgust. "If he comes back, just say the word. Plenty of us would be happy to explain Montana hospitality to him." The threat of Harper receded as winter deepened, snow isolating the ranch in a peaceful cocoon. Katherine bloomed in her new role as Samuel's wife, adding touches to their home that made it truly theirs, learning the rhythms of ranch life with enthusiasm and determination. By spring, when the snow finally melted and travel became easier, Katherine had become an integral part of the ranch's operations. She kept the books with greater skill than Samuel ever had, started a small kitchen garden, and even learned to help with calving when hands were short. In April, she shared news that completed their joy. She was expecting a child in late autumn. "A baby," Samuel said wonderingly, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" Katherine asked, though his radiant expression answered the question. "More than I can say," he replied, gathering her close. "I never thought I'd have this, a family of my own. You've given me back something I thought lost forever." "And you've given me a home," she whispered, "when I thought I'd never feel safe again." Their happiness seemed complete, the shadow of William Harper fading into memory as spring turned to summer and Katherine's pregnancy progressed. She continued teaching until the end of the term, then focused on preparing for their child's arrival. In July, however, a letter arrived that shattered their peace. It came addressed to Katherine at the schoolhouse, forwarded to the ranch by Reverend Parker. The Boston postmark made Samuel's heart sink as he handed it to his wife. Katherine opened it with trembling fingers, her face growing pale as she read. "It's from my aunt," she said, looking up at Samuel with fear in her eyes. "William has filed legal papers in Boston, claiming I'm mentally unstable and was abducted to Montana territory. He's seeking to have our marriage invalidated and to be appointed my legal guardian." Samuel took the letter, anger building as he read the details. Harper had apparently convinced a sympathetic judge to consider his petition, based on evidence of Katherine's fragile mental state following her parents' deaths. "Can he do this?" Katherine asked, one hand protectively covering her growing belly. "He can try," Samuel replied grimly. "But we're legally married in this territory, and you're of sound mind. No Eastern judge's ruling will change that here." "But if I ever traveled east?" "Then we don't travel east," Samuel said simply. "Katherine, he's grasping at straws. This is harassment, nothing more." She nodded, though worry still clouded her eyes. "What if he comes back, with papers, with authorities?" Samuel took her hands in his. "Then we face it together." "I won't let him take you, Katherine. I swore that when we married, and I swear it again now." That night, as Katherine slept restlessly beside him, Samuel made plans. The next morning, he rode into Clearwater to speak with Judge Hamilton, the territorial magistrate, explaining the situation and seeking advice. The judge, a gruff but fair-minded man who had known Samuel for years, listened carefully. "Harper's Eastern court order would have limited power here," he confirmed, "especially given that you're legally married in the territory and expecting a child, but to be safe," he pulled out paper and pen, "let's document Mrs. Thornton's clear mental competence and her statement regarding Harper's abuse. With official territorial documentation contradicting his claims, even an Eastern court would hesitate to intervene." Samuel left with official papers declaring Katherine of sound mind, and documenting her statement about Harper's abuse, signed and sealed by Judge Hamilton. It wasn't foolproof protection, but it strengthened their position significantly. August brought news that Harper's petition had been temporarily granted in Boston, pending further investigation. Katherine received a formal notice ordering her to return east for examination by court-appointed doctors. "I won't go," she said firmly, the paper crumpled in her fist. "They can't force me." "No, they can't," Samuel agreed. "Judge Hamilton's documentation will help if Harper tries to enforce this here, and I've spoken with Sheriff Davies, he's on our side." September passed without further incident, allowing them to hope that Harper had given up or that the distance and difficulty of enforcing his court order had proven too great. Then in early October, with Katherine 7 months pregnant and radiant despite her growing discomfort, William Harper returned to Clearwater. This time, he brought a Boston lawyer and copies of the court orders declaring him Katherine's legal guardian. Samuel received warning from Frank Wilkins, who rode out to the ranch the moment Harper was spotted in town. "He's at the hotel," Wilkins reported. "Him and some fancy lawyer type. They were asking about the quickest way to reach your place." Samuel glanced toward the house where Katherine was resting. "Thank you, Frank. Would you mind staying with Katherine while I ride in to deal with this?" "Happy to," Wilkins agreed. Emma packed food, figuring we might need to stay a spell. Samuel gathered his documentation from Judge Hamilton, checked his revolver, and rode toward town, determination hardening his features. He would end this threat to his family today, one way or another. He found Harper and his lawyer, a thin, dyspeptic-looking man named Caldwell, preparing to leave the hotel. "Gentlemen," Samuel called, dismounting. "I understand you're looking for me." Harper's expression twisted with dislike. "Mr. Thornton, I'm here on official business regarding Katherine Calloway." "There is no Katherine Calloway," Samuel replied evenly. "My wife's name is Katherine Thornton, and she's not available to you or your lawyer." Caldwell stepped forward, brandishing papers. "We have a court order from Massachusetts declaring Miss Calloway mentally incompetent and appointing Mr. Harper as her legal guardian. Any marriage she entered into without her guardian's consent is invalid." Samuel remained unruffled. "Your Massachusetts court has no jurisdiction here. My wife is a resident of Montana Territory, legally married under territorial law and expecting our child next month. Furthermore," he produced Judge Hamilton's documentation, "we have official territorial certification of her mental competence and her statement regarding Harper's abuse, which prompted her to flee Boston." The lawyer snatched the papers, scanning them with a frown. "These are irrelevant." "Our court order is worthless here," interrupted a new voice. Sheriff Davies approached, hand resting casually on his holster. "Judge Hamilton explained the situation to me, Mr. Thornton. These gentlemen bothering you." "They were just leaving, I believe," Samuel replied, never taking his eyes off Harper. "Weren't you, gentlemen?" Harper's face had flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. Katherine needs help, protection." "She's not well." "My wife is perfectly well," Samuel countered, "and the only protection she needs is from you." "This isn't over," Harper hissed. "I'll appeal to higher authorities, territorial courts, federal if necessary." Samuel stepped closer, his voice dropping so only Harper could hear. "Let me be very clear. If you come near my wife again, if you continue this harassment, I will end it permanently. Katherine is my wife carrying my child. There is nothing I wouldn't do to protect them. Nothing. Do you understand?" Something in Samuel's eyes, the absolute certainty, the dangerous promise, finally penetrated Harper's arrogance. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. "You're threatening me," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm promising you," Samuel corrected quietly. "Walk away, Harper, go back to Boston, find someone else to control. Katherine is lost to you forever." The lawyer tugged at Harper's sleeve. "Mr. Harper, perhaps we should reconsider. The territorial documentation complicates matters significantly, and with the pregnancy." He glanced nervously at Sheriff Davies. We might be better served reassessing our legal strategy from Boston." For a long moment Harper stood frozen, rage and thwarted possession battling in his expression. Then, with visible effort, he regained his composure. "This discussion is postponed, not concluded," he said stiffly. "Come, Caldwell." As they walked away, Sheriff Davies turned to Samuel. "Think he's really giving up?" "No," Samuel replied honestly. "But I think he's beginning to understand the cost of continuing." "Well, if he causes any more trouble while he's in my town, I'll be happy to explain frontier justice to him," the sheriff said with a grim smile. "How's Mrs. Thornton holding up?" "Strong as ever," Samuel said, pride evident in his voice. "Though I'll feel better once this threat is truly behind us." "Give her my regards," Davies said, clapping Samuel on the shoulder. "And don't worry too much. Man like Harper, all bluster, no backbone. He'll slink back east eventually." Samuel nodded, though he remained unconvinced. Harper's obsession with Katherine seemed too deeply rooted for him to simply surrender. Still, they had won this round decisively. He returned to the ranch to find Katherine and Wilkins sitting on the porch, Katherine knitting something small for the baby, while Wilkins told exaggerated stories of his youth. "Samuel," Katherine set aside her knitting, rising awkwardly due to her advanced pregnancy. "What happened?" He helped her back into her chair before explaining the confrontation. "Harper's lawyer seemed to recognize they're on shaky legal ground," he concluded. "But I don't think Harper himself is ready to give up." Katherine's hand moved protectively to her belly. "What can we do?" "We've done everything legally possible," Samuel assured her. "Now we wait and watch. Harper can't take you if he can't get near you." That evening, after Wilkins departed, Samuel held Katherine close as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the swell of their child. "I'm sorry," she whispered in the darkness. "Sorry that loving me has brought you such complications." "Don't ever apologize for that," he said firmly. "Katherine, before you I was half alive, just existing, not living. You gave me back everything I thought lost forever: hope, love, family. There's nothing I wouldn't face to keep you safe." She turned in his arms, her face visible in the moonlight streaming through the window. "When did you know?" "That you loved me, I mean." Samuel smiled, remembering. "I think part of me knew that very first day in the general store, when that scent of lavender made me look up, but I fought it for months." "Why?" she asked, curious. "Fear," he admitted. "After losing my family, I convinced myself that caring for people only led to pain. Better to stay alone, keep to myself." "What changed your mind?" Samuel brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You did, your courage, your kindness, your determination. You showed me that yes, love brings risk, but a life without love isn't really living at all." Katherine leaned forward to kiss him softly. "I knew when you split wood for me," she confessed. "Watching you work so hard to ensure I'd be warm through winter, expecting nothing in return, that's when I knew I loved you." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the threat of Harper temporarily set aside in favor of the joy they'd found together. The following morning, Samuel was checking the barn when Frank Wilkins rode in at a gallop, his expression grave. "Harper's gone," he announced without preamble. Samuel straightened. "Back to Boston." "No," Wilkins dismounted, leading his horse to the water trough. "Left the hotel before dawn, according to Mrs. Hanson. Packed his things, settled his bill." "But he didn't take the stage east." Unease prickled along Samuel's spine. "Where did he go?" "Nobody knows for certain, but," Wilkins hesitated, "his lawyer took the stage alone." The implications were clear. Harper hadn't given up, he'd simply changed tactics, possibly deciding to take matters into his own hands rather than rely on legal proceedings. "I'll alert the hands," Samuel decided. "No one approaches the house without being identified first." He spent the day organizing watches, ensuring Katherine was never alone. Though he didn't want to frighten her unnecessarily, he explained the situation honestly when she asked about the increased security. "You think he might try to force me to return with him?" she asked, fear evident in her eyes. I think he's desperate and unstable, Samuel replied carefully, which means we take precautions. But don't worry, you're safe here, I promise. 3 tense days passed with no sign of Harper. Samuel began to hope the man had simply left the territory by another route, perhaps heading to Helena or Fort Benton to catch transport east. On the 4th morning, Samuel rode out with 2 hands to check the herd, leaving Jenkins and young Jim to guard the house. The cattle had been restless lately, and he wanted to ensure none had strayed before the first snowfall, which threatened daily. They were about 2 miles from the ranch house when Samuel spotted smoke rising from the direction of the homestead. Not the usual smoke of the cooking fire or stove, but darker, more ominous. "Fire!" he shouted, wheeling Maple around. "Ride!" They galloped back toward the ranch, horror growing as the smoke thickened. As they crested the last rise, Samuel's worst fears were confirmed. The barn was ablaze, flames leaping high into the autumn sky. He spurred Maple faster, his heart pounding. Where was Katherine? Where were Jenkins and Jim? As they approached, he saw Jim battling the fire with a bucket line from the well, joined by Jenkins. Relief washed over him. They were alive at least. "Where's Mrs. Thornton?" he shouted as he dismounted. Jenkins looked up, his face streaked with soot. "Inside the house when it started. Told her to stay put." Samuel ran for the cabin, calling Katherine's name. There was no answer. He burst through the door to find the main room empty, signs of a hasty departure evident, a knocked-over chair, Katherine's shawl on the floor rather than hanging neatly. "Katherine," he shouted, checking the bedroom, the kitchen. Nothing. Cold dread settled in his stomach as he returned outside. The fire was clearly a diversion. While everyone fought the blaze, someone, Harper, had taken Katherine. "Jenkins," he called, "did you see anyone else, any strangers?" The foreman shook his head. "Been fighting this since it started. Must have been set while we were checking the south pasture." Samuel scanned the ground, looking for tracks, for any sign of which way they might have gone. The hard-packed earth near the house revealed little, but beyond the garden he spotted something, indentations of horse hooves heading east. "Keep fighting the fire," he ordered. "Jim, ride for town, alert the sheriff, tell him Harper's taken my wife." "You going after them alone?" Jenkins asked, concern evident. "No time to wait." Samuel checked his revolver, then remounted Maple. "They can't have more than 30 minutes head start. Harper's not a skilled rider, they won't be moving fast." Without waiting for further discussion, Samuel spurred Maple after the tracks. Katherine was nearly 8 months pregnant. The stress and rough travel could endanger both her and their unborn child. He had to find them quickly. The tracks led east, away from town, toward the more rugged country that bordered their land. Harper was clearly avoiding populated areas where he might be recognized. Samuel followed grimly, Maple's hooves eating up the distance as they pushed into increasingly broken terrain. An hour into the pursuit, he found the first clear sign, a scrap of fabric caught on a thorny bush, the same shade as the dress Katherine had been wearing that morning. He was on the right trail. The land rose toward the foothills, the path becoming steeper, narrower. Harper was heading for the mountains, perhaps hoping to reach the next settlement over the pass where he might not be known. Samuel pushed on, alert for any sign. The afternoon was waning, shadows lengthening when he heard it, a horse's whinny not far ahead. He reined in Maple, listening carefully. Voices carried on the wind, a man's, angry and frustrated, then a woman's response, too faint to make out the words but unmistakably Katherine's tone. Moving more cautiously now, Samuel dismounted, leading Maple quietly through the trees. He crested a small rise and looked down into a small clearing where 2 horses were tethered. Harper stood beside one, attempting to help Katherine, who was sitting on a fallen log, clearly exhausted. "We need to keep moving," Harper was saying, his voice taut with frustration. "The pass is still hours away." "I told you I can't," Katherine replied, one hand pressed to her belly. "The baby, the riding is too much." "The baby," Harper spat. "That rancher's brat. Once we're back in Boston, we'll deal with that unfortunate situation." Samuel's blood ran cold at the implication. He tied Maple securely, then drew his revolver, moving silently through the underbrush until he had a clear line of sight. Katherine looked pale but defiant, her hands protectively covering her stomach. "I am not going to Boston," she said clearly. "Samuel will find us, you know he will." "Your precious husband is busy with his burning barn," Harper sneered. "By the time he sorts that out, we'll be well away. Now get up." "We're leaving." He grabbed Katherine's arm roughly, trying to pull her to her feet. She cried out in pain, and something in Samuel snapped. He stepped into the clearing, revolver leveled at Harper's chest. "Let her go," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Now." Harper froze, then slowly turned, still gripping Katherine's arm. "Thornton," he said, attempting to sound casual despite the fear in his eyes, "this doesn't concern you anymore. Katherine is coming home with me, where she belongs." "Samuel," Katherine's face lit with relief and love. "He set the barn on fire as a diversion." "I figured that out," Samuel replied, not taking his eyes off Harper. "Are you hurt?" "No, but the baby. The riding has been difficult." Samuel took a step closer. For the last time, Harper let her go. Instead, Harper yanked Katherine to her feet, positioning her partially in front of him. "You won't risk shooting her," he said, a note of desperation in his voice. "Put down the gun, Thornton." "William, please," Katherine pleaded. "This is madness. Let me go." "Never," Harper hissed. "You're mine, Katherine. You've always been mine." Samuel assessed the situation with the calm clarity that had kept him alive during the war. Harper was using Katherine as a shield, but he was agitated, unstable. Samuel needed to get him away from her before he did something truly dangerous. "You're right about one thing, Harper," Samuel said conversationally, lowering his revolver slightly. "I won't risk shooting Katherine." Harper's tense posture relaxed marginally. "Smart man, now back away and we'll be on our." In one fluid motion, Samuel raised his revolver and fired, not at Harper but at a point just above his head. The shot cracked through the clearing, startling both Harper and the tethered horses, which reared and pulled at their ropes. In the moment of confusion, Katherine wrenched herself free of Harper's grip and stumbled toward Samuel. Harper, recovering quickly, reached for something in his coat, a small derringer Samuel hadn't noticed before. "Katherine, down!" Samuel shouted, raising his revolver again. Katherine dropped to her knees as Harper aimed his small pistol. Samuel fired first, his bullet striking Harper's shoulder, spinning him around. The derringer discharged harmlessly into the ground as Harper fell. Samuel was at Katherine's side instantly, helping her up while keeping his revolver trained on Harper, who lay groaning on the ground, blood spreading across his expensive coat. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked urgently, his free hand gently touching her face. "Yes," she assured him, though she was trembling. "The baby moved just now. I think we're both fine." Relief washed over Samuel. He turned his attention back to Harper, who was trying to sit up, his face contorted with pain. "Don't move," Samuel ordered coldly, "unless you want the next bullet somewhere more permanent." Harper slumped back, his rage giving way to defeat. "You've ruined everything," he said bitterly. "She was mine before you ever met her." "Katherine belongs to no one but herself," Samuel replied. "She chose me, chose this life. Your inability to accept that is your problem, not ours." The sound of approaching riders reached them, Sheriff Davies and a small posse, led by Jim. Samuel had never been so glad to see the sheriff's weathered face. "Found him, I see," Davies said, dismounting. He took in the scene, Harper bleeding on the ground, Katherine pale but safe beside Samuel. Everyone all right. "Mrs. Thornton needs to see the doctor," Samuel said. "Harper's wound isn't life-threatening." Davies nodded to his deputies, who moved to secure Harper. "Kidnapping, arson. You've had a busy day, Mr. Harper. The territorial prison isn't nearly as comfortable as your Boston mansion, I imagine." As they helped Harper onto a horse, he looked at Katherine one last time. "I loved you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "In my way, I did." Katherine met his gaze steadily. "That wasn't love, William, it was possession. I hope someday you learn the difference." They watched as the posse led Harper away, his shoulders slumped in final defeat. When they were alone, Katherine turned to Samuel, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "You found me," she whispered. "I knew you would." Samuel gathered her into his arms, holding her as if he'd never let go. "Always," he promised. "I will always find you." The baby came early, perhaps hastened by the trauma of the kidnapping. Just 2 weeks after Harper's arrest, Katherine went into labor as the first snow of winter blanketed the ranch. Samuel paced anxiously outside their bedroom while Mrs. Wilkins, who had experience as a midwife, attended Katherine. The labor was long and difficult, Katherine's cries tearing at Samuel's heart as the hours passed. Finally, as dawn broke on a crystal-clear winter morning, a new cry joined Katherine's, the lusty wail of a newborn taking their first breath. Mrs. Wilkins appeared at the door, her tired face wreathed in smiles. "You have a daughter, Mr. Thornton, a beautiful, healthy daughter." Samuel entered the bedroom with reverent steps. Katherine lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her smile brighter than the sunrise outside. "Samuel," she said softly, "come meet your daughter." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, peering at the tiny red face nestled against Katherine's breast. The baby had a dusting of blonde hair, and when she briefly opened her eyes, he glimpsed a deep blue that might someday turn green like her mother's. "She's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the baby's impossibly small hand. Tiny fingers reflexively curled around his larger one, and Samuel felt his heart expand with a love so profound it left him breathless. "What shall we call her?" Katherine asked. Samuel thought for a moment. "What about Lavender?" Katherine's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with understanding. "Lavender Thornton," she said, testing the name. "It's beautiful, but why?" Samuel smiled, remembering the first time he'd caught that distinctive scent in the general store, how it had made him look up and see Katherine. How it had followed her, become part of his memories of their courtship, their growing love. "Because it led me to you," he said simply, "and you led me home." Katherine's eyes filled with tears of joy. "I love it." "And I love you, Samuel Thornton." "And I love you, Katherine Thornton," he replied, leaning forward to kiss her gently. "Both of you, more than I ever thought possible." Outside, the Montana winter settled over the land, snow transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland. But inside the ranch house, warmth and love created a haven against the cold. A family forged through trials, strengthened by challenges, bound together by a love that had overcome every obstacle. As baby Lavender slept peacefully between her parents, Samuel knew with absolute certainty that he had found everything he'd never dared to hope for. Not just survival, but life in its fullest measure. And it had all begun with the scent of lavender, leading him to the truth of what mattered most.